Thank you, everyone. Our next speaker, I could tell you that I was given the honor to do the introduction. When I Googled Dr. Jacob's name, I came across so much information that if I was to stand here and do a proper introduction, I would probably be standing here no less than about 20 minutes or so. So just for the sake of time, I'd like to do a brief introduction. It is my honor to introduce our distinguished speaker today, Dr. Beverly Jacobs, a luminary in the field of Indigenous relations, law, human rights advocacy. Dr. Jacobs wears many hats, each representing a significant facet of her remarkable career and unwavering commitment to social justice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jacobs as we embark on this enlightening journey into Indigenous legal orders and the invaluable wisdom that she will share with us today.
Scano, Sobuego, Giaso, Gowenki se, Ganyangehaga, Nyagwait, Shoutda, Hodinashoni. What I said to you was greetings of peace in my language, which is actually the Cayuga language, which is one of the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I told you my nation, which is the Mohawk Nation, and my clan, which is the Bear Clan, and my name, my real name. So my real name is Gowenkyuse. That's my Mohawk Bear Clan name. And my GST name is Beverly Jacobs. I stole that from a Mohawk elder, actually. So I'm honored and thank you for the invitation to present today. I have been privileged to be raised in my community at 6 Nations, Grand River Territory, and was raised as a Haudenosaunee, what I call a practitioner of our laws. And when I say that I practice our culture, traditions, and was raised in it. So I was raised with leaders. I was raised with faith keepers, with chiefs, traditional chiefs, with our clan mothers. And growing up, I actually didn't realize how much I was taught because when you're living it, when you're in it, you don't realize the impacts that has had on my life. And so when I realized actually how much I've been taught was when I was in law school. And so I'm a graduate of Windsor Law, 1994, and it was a horrific experience. So being raised traditionally as a Haudenosaunee woman, as a Mohawk woman, learning about colonial law that was used as a tool to try to erase our people. And that was probably the worst experience, but I managed and now have used that as what I call it lights my fire. Because it was used as a tool to try to erase and what I call legalized genocide. So those of you, I think it's important to understand the reasons why we're now teaching Indigenous legal orders to all of the first-year law students here at Windsor. It's a mandatory course. It's part of the curriculum. That it's the underlying, the purpose of Indigenous laws is related to the land. It's related to who we are as a people and our relationship to the land and the waters and all of creation. So I wanted to share a bit. I got 30 minutes. And usually teaching this in a whole full course to all first-year law students, and I'm going to share bits about it and what I'm able to share with you. So I told you already a little bit about who I am. I'm a very spiritual person as well. When I talk about where I come from and my relationship, it is about spirit. It's about our laws are very spiritual, but they're also very emotional. And it's all related to the language. So even as I'm speaking, and our language is totally different. And so sometimes when it's translated into English, there's a lot that's missing because it's emotional, because it's spiritual, and it's directly connected to, I would say, like actions. Our language is very descriptive, and so it's very specific. So this is who I am. I'm a grandmother, and now actually a great-grandmother. I'm a great-grandmother to a 3-week-old great-granddaughter. And this picture, this artwork was done by my late husband, who passed away during COVID, from COVID. So that was a very traumatic experience, as well as all of the other layers of trauma that our people have had to survive over many generations. So I would say that who am I? I'm a survivor of violence. I'm a survivor of genocide. And I also say that I'm victorious because I was able, and my family was able, and our community and our nation has been able to survive a genocidal colonial processes. And standing here now to teach you and educate about why our laws are important. So coming from Haudenosaunee peoples, as you know, it's where we formulate from 6 different nations, originally 5. And when I say I'm Mohawk, it comes from my mother, so we're come from a matriarchal society. And so my mother, my grandmother, you know, I can trace it far. I would say right to our creation story. And so as a matriarch, as coming from that matriarchal society, it's my responsibility to also teach, to educate my own family. And so I have double duty. So I'm teaching at home. I'm teaching my family, and now teaching what I call within this colonial institution called university. And so part of understanding that relationship is understanding the history, understanding probably things that you are not aware. So I want to see hands. How many of you know about my people? How many know about the differences between Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples? A little bit. So I always ask the question, why is that? Why is that you don't know? It was because of colonial law and because institutions were created for you, for settlers. We were never consulted on any of the laws that are colonial laws that are established today. And the institutions like education, law, social, health have all been created under colonial, Eurocentric principles, systems. So what I'm going to be talking about is an Indigenous system. And so coming right back to the land, coming right back to where we come from, we also usually start our gatherings, our ceremonies, or any time where people come together, because we respect each other's spirit so much that we know that when you're coming into a space, like this, that there's all kinds of, like me, myself, there's all kinds of other things that are happening around us and where we come from and our work. And so when we're coming into a space like this, there's a specific reason why we're coming into this space. And so we respect your spirit. And so we always have what's called a Thanksgiving address. And depending on the speaker, in the language, it can take almost an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on the speaker and how detailed that they want to be about every living thing and giving thanks and starting with the people. So because you've joined us, because we're joined together in this specific purpose, is recognizing that. And also Mother Earth, the waters, the fish, the food, the animals, the trees, those are all part of the Thanksgiving address, because we say as human beings, we're not any different than those other spiritual living things. And that we're always in a reciprocal relationship, that we're always giving thanks all of the time. Because if it wasn't for those other living things, we wouldn't be here as human beings. So without water, we wouldn't be here. Without our mother, the earth, we wouldn't be here. So all of those things have a purpose in our relationship with them. So our ceremonies, everything is related to that. Everything is related to giving thanks, and also the relationship to the land. So when I describe myself, when I introduced myself, I told you I was Ganyangihaga. And literally translated, that means people of the flint. But some of you know it as the Mohawk Nation. But when it's literally translated, it directly connects us to our land and our territories. Every Indigenous language has that identifier, has that language to identify our relationship to the land. So it's important to understand that all of this territory is Indigenous land and territory, and that the impacts of the doctrine of discovery and Christian domination, all of those things that we are now teaching and learning about, had a direct impact on our lands and our territories and the land that's been stolen right from under us. So, and that's directly related because they were wanting to erase us as a people. So this territory, when I mentioned Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, this is the treaty. It's called the Dish with One Spoon. So we always use, this is pre-Confederation, so this is pre-colonization. We always used wampum as part of our sacred relationship, ceremony, things that we understood as part of our law, our oral history, things that made us remember or helped us to remember our history and our laws. So this territory that you're sitting on here is part of this treaty. It's called A Dish with One Spoon. So it was a relationship between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And so recognizing the peace amongst our people. And so this represented a dish, and inside the dish was a beaver tail. And they recognized the beaver as one of the most sacred animals, and the protein and the well-being and the in their tails. So it was also recognizing the sustenance, the healthiness of our people, and the relationship to the land, and the relationship to all of those animals and food that helped us to survive. And that they said that there was no knife in this bowl, and that meant peace, that we were no longer going to fight, because we were at war with each other. We were at war, as I'm not saying that we were a peaceful people. We were a very warring people. But the peacemaker and the great law of peace, which is what I'm going to talk about, already established peace amongst our people and this peace amongst our nations. And so that's what this represented, and it represented all of Southern Ontario and our relationship to each other and respecting the land and the territory where we come from. So I just wanted to recognize that. Some people call that a land acknowledgement, but this is our land acknowledgement. This is our relationship also to each other. And again, like I said, this is pre-Confederation, so we already knew about peace treaties, peace and friendship relationships before colonizers ever stepped foot in our territory. So just to set just some examples. So this is what I teach about in a language. So when I began my journey, so here in Windsor at the law school, and I'm telling you that it was a struggle. But I was 3 hours from home, so I was able to get home to ceremony whenever I needed to, and whenever I felt like quitting, because it was a daily thing. I didn't want to be here. But when I went back home and I would talk to our leadership, I would actually go to leadership meetings because my family was involved, still is. I would talk to them about it, and I would ask the question, because they were language speakers, is there a word for law? And they told me, no, there isn't. But there is order. There is what we call in the language Okwenhya, and it means our way of being. It means everything about who we are. There's no separation between law, health, social. It's all holistic. There's no silos. There's nothing that creates this division amongst each other. So these are the different what I call sources of our laws. So Gaswenta, which is this belt, and I'm going to talk about that, and there's hundreds of wampum belts. So I did my master's in law after, and decided to abuse myself even more. But I was able to focus specifically on Haudenosaunee law and the Great Law of Peace and international law. And the wampum belts in studying my people, because we don't even learn this in school. On the reserve, went to school on the reserve at Six Nations. We never learned anything about our history. We learned about the colonizers. So I found that very interesting, how education, even in itself, controlled that learning. So it wasn't until doing my master's, I understood a lot of it growing up in it, but being able to focus specifically on our laws and recognizing that our wampum belts was a major source of our law and our creation story. So every nation has their own creation story in the language that's taught from generation to generation. And also, when I talked about coming from a matriarchal society, we also have what's called mother law. So the responsibilities of our mothers, who are the leaders, who were recognized as the leaders, our clan mothers, in making decisions for our clans, and that there was recognition of it through the Great Law of Peace and choosing the male leadership. So there was already inherent equality in our laws. There was a balance not only amongst us with creation, but amongst us as genders. And so there was that important relationship that we also had with each other as human beings. And songs and dances. So in every ceremony that we have, traditionally and spiritually, there's a song that's sung, dances that are sung we can trace them right to the creation story and the whole purpose of that Thanksgiving as well. And it follows creation. So it follows the seasons. So every ceremony that we have follows that what's happening in the natural world. So we just finished our harvest ceremony. And our harvest ceremony, many of you think of it as Thanksgiving, But that was always our harvest ceremony, where we're giving thanks to the sustenance, to what we have planted over the summer and harvested. So, and then so next coming over the winter. So we don't do ceremonies over the winter. They call that storytelling time. So that's when we have that time to teach our children and teach each other. And then once we get into the midwinter, our midwinter ceremonies will be the end of January. And that's, I always notice that it's also the same time as the Chinese New Year, because we follow the moons. So it's we have our midwinter ceremonies in the end of January, and it's a whole, it's a 7-day ceremony. And so all of our ceremonies take time as well. And again, so all of these are part, the songs and the dances are part of those ceremonies. And I always say art is a source of our law as well, because our artists, I would even say that those of my ancestors that created our wampum belts were visionaries, right? They created these designs in our belts for us to remember, but it's also how brilliant they were to be able to create these kind of the tools at the time, but now being able to use them as a tool of education and remembrance of our history, of our laws. And my uncle, who is one of our traditional chiefs, is also an artist. So this is his art. It's actually the creation story. One part of the creation story was Sky Woman falling from what we call a spirit world, and she's pregnant. And we always say, when you think about it, that everybody has language, not just humans, but birds and animals, every living thing. So what we're taught is that they talk to each other as they saw Sky Woman falling from the sky, and that so the birds, the geese caught her. They caught her, and they water animals were watching her falling. They were talking to each other, and it was a turtle that brought itself up to the surface of the water, because it was all water, and they placed her on the back of the turtle's back, which is why we call her Turtle Island, why we call this Turtle Island. And so, and you can see the shape of North America, South America, as the turtle. And so there was another part of the creation story. It's a long, again, when we do the recitals of these, it's done in the language and then translated. And a lot of times, like I said, the translation isn't the same, because there's just some things that English doesn't capture. And so that's the recognition. So, it takes a full day, maybe a couple days even, to recite just the creation story. The Great Law of Peace, that is our constitution of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And it takes at least 7 days to recite from start to finish. The Thanksgiving address I talked about, and also corn. I say this is actually parts of my PhD dissertation, and talking with our knowledge holders, and that law is in the corn. So corn is also a sacred food for us, and there's so many teachings about the corn. It again would take days to teach about. Our medicines and sacred plants, those again are all part of the practice of our law and health, the healthiness. So we have traditional medicine people, have always been part of our community, and there are healers, there are doctors, there are nurses that take care of our health using traditional plants. And even sacred places where they are. So I want to share I'm going to move fast forward from the time of colonization, or actually from even the peace treaty to the time of colonization, and talk about this belt, which is called Guswenta. And Guswenta means river of life. How many know this? A couple people. Well, everybody should know this, because we're all descendants of this relationship, this treaty. This is called the Turo Wampum Belt, or Guswenta. So my ancestors, the Haudenosaunee, and the early colonizers, which is the Dutch, the British, the French, and the United States. So our people got caught in Great Britain and the 13 colony wars, right? We were already at peace with each other. The colonizers come, we get caught in the wars. Our people participated in every war that existed. So this border that you see over here was not in existence. And our people did not know this. So we're talking about this relationship to the land. That border was not there. And actually the border went right through my people's territory because of our participation in the wars. So going back to this original relationship, and I'm going to pick on the British because that's where Canada's laws are, right? So this line represented their ship. It represented their laws, their customs, their beliefs, everything that made them who they are. And this is our canoe. So everything I just talked about, our laws, everything, our sources of our laws is part, we carry that in our canoe. Everything that made us who we are, our way of being. And that these three white lines, so the white represents sacred, represents spirit, represents that sacred spiritual relationship that we had. So there was a lot of negotiations that went along with this relationship building. And there were three principles. So there's these three lines, but there's also three in between. Peace, trust, and friendship. That was the intention of this relationship between my people and also that sovereign relationship, nation to nation relationship. That we would respect each other, trust each other, and be friends with each other. Nothing in this relationship said we were giving up any land or any territory, that we would share it. That's how we understood it. We understood that relationship with each other. And so that is what that relationship, that sacred relationship, and our people have never forgotten. And in fact, during negotiations for many of our land disputes, we always come back to this original relationship. And so, picking on Britain, all of a sudden we have a legislation called the British North America Act. Section 9124, which is now the Constitution Act, says that they control Indians and lands reserved for Indians. Where did they get that authority from? It was just a unilateral, because we can, because of the doctrine of discovery, that we are taking ownership in this place called Canada. So as a result of that piece of legislation, it also created division of powers. Everybody knows Section 91 and 92. Right? So federal powers, they create the Indian Act. The Indian Act is one of the most racist, sexist pieces of legislation that exists in the world. And it controls status Indians, and this is a term called from the womb to the tomb, even after the tomb, because they control and have to approve my will. They have to approve status Indians' wills. That's how much control that they have. They decide who's an Indian, right? That's not even the right word. That's a racist word. But it's still used. It's still legislation. It still exists. It's also patriarchal. So in order to be a status Indian, this is before 1985 when they amended the Indian Act. You were a man, you were married to that man, or you were a child of that man. That's how you became a status Indian. Forgetting about our matriarchal society, forgetting about how we identify who we are coming from our mothers. It was a direct target against our women. And this is, again, part of the study that I've done, and one of the things that I think is amazing is that all of the colonial historical documents are written, and you can do the research and you can find out what they're saying. And what they said at the time, when they were looking at our nations as Haudenosaunee people, this is what I found in the documents. They could not believe that a bunch of old ladies could govern a community. So there was a lack of understanding, and actually didn't even want to understand. So that's what was brought in their ship. And the way that women were treated in that ship was that women had no rights. We already, like I said, had that equality inherent in our laws. So again, we were forced into this colonial ship and following these systems that we were forced into, and it totally violated this original relationship. Everything about this relationship has been violated according to British law. And so now we're dealing with it. Now we're having to deal with the impacts. And residential school was under the Indian Act. Residential schools, like I said, is what I call legislated genocide, because it gave the churches and the governments the authority to erase us, using Christianity and using the erasure of land and territory and people and children as part of that process. Again, I could talk for days about that. But once I started looking also about our laws, when we start talking about the relationship, so this is, again, part of my PhD work, and looking at this relationship was supposed to be a healthy relationship, right? We're supposed to trust each other, we're supposed to respect each other, we're supposed to be friends with each other. This is what I call reconciliation today, or what should be reconciliation. And so when we're talking about our laws, and then this is, again, is coming back to the work in working with our knowledge holders, every one of them said our laws is about responsibility. It's about our responsibilities to each other as human beings. It's about our responsibilities to the natural laws, to every living spiritual thing. That's what our ceremonies are all about. It's about that relationship and the respect of every living thing. But then once we start talking about colonial law, so that's on the ship side, start talking about rights. That was never in our language. But that is what colonial law, even when we're talking about Indigenous rights, the Constitution that was changed to respect Aboriginal and treaty rights under Section 35 of the Constitution Act. So then we were constitutionalized. But again, the legislation, the Constitution Act never defined, and there was no respect to Indigenous peoples. So now they've been defined in the courts. And so that's the struggle that we have today, because the courts are now defining our rights, which is wrong. And so again, in my PhD research, I studied Section 35, and the root of that is If there's anything that goes against Canadian sovereignty, we'll never win. Because the root of it is Canadian sovereignty. So I say the courts are biased. The courts are biased because they will always go back to Canadian sovereignty. There's no respect of this relationship. And actually, it's starting to shift a little bit, tiny, tiny bit, in the recognition of Haudenosaunee laws. So they have to come back to this. It has to, because of this original relationship. And because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report. How many have read the report? If you haven't read the report, not just the calls to action, the whole report. How many read the whole report? You need to read the whole report, not just the calls to action, because the whole report identifies everything I'm talking about. And so it's understanding that relationship, and that what I'm saying is that we have to return to that relationship. It's not that hard to do, really, those principles that we have. Well, I went way over. These are some of the laws, again, that we as Indigenous peoples, according to colonial law, have been forced into. Constitutional law, federal law, criminal law, I did that twice. Family law, which is provincial, child welfare, and youth justice. So when you look at these laws, they're all colonial laws, and you look at the statistics and the numbers of our people and the disrespect and the dishonor of our people, this is where you will find it. Many other laws. So all I'm saying is that we need to be educated about this, to have knowledge. I'm looking for transformative systemic change. I'm also looking for empowering my people, because there's been so much impacts of colonization on our people. We're still working at identifying our strengths and who we are and where we come from. And really, it's the recognition. I was going to get a whole process of how the systems are different. Ours is holistic. The colonial system is adversarial. And I've even been looking at legal principles. So as Haudenosaunee principles, and focusing on the criminal aspect is criminal legal principles and the differences amongst them. So I'm going to end there and just say that I really want to thank you for your attention and for inviting me to present here today. And this is my life's work. This is everything that I do, where I come from, why I went to law school, why I do what I do, and why I will die doing this. So, yeah, well, thank you.